susspots as well.
Let's do it. I think we are. I think we're live. Yeah, I should probably check. If we are live, then welcome right on. Let's rock and roll with this security discussion on Helium. Let me double check and make sure that I'm not screwing anything up, because that is always a possibility with these things. We're all like figuring this stuff out, right? With what we're seeing, what we're talking about. Okay. Sorry, folks. If you're joining this, this is all my fault. I'm fucking this up. We good, Neil?
We're good. We're all good.
Okay, cool. Let's do it then. Dig it. So what we've got today are three experts on Helium, on security in general, and then me. So you got BFG Neil, you got Rob, and you got Anthony, and you got myself. And the idea is that we have all, four of us, seen lots and lots of questions about gaming and how secure Helium is and all the rest of it. And so Neil had suggested we do an open conversation about what is kind of out there, what's happened so far, and what will happen in the future. And then we got Rob, who runs Susspots, right, Rob? Yep. And that's
Yep, that's right.
Just kind of, I guess, suspicious hotspots is the idea there.
Exactly. Yep.
Yep. And then Anthony, you're writing and helping out with a bunch of the hips. You've been kind of in Helium for a while. I've seen you in Discord for as long as I've been there, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely written a couple hips. Hip 14 was my first one. And then most recent one's 42, actually. And then I co-authored 40 with Neil. So.
Nice. All right. You guys are crushing. Well done. Well done. Okay. So let's start off with, maybe we start off with some perspective, right? Is that right now when we record this, January of 2022, we kind of see screamers about gaming and like this person's earning, 1.2 HNT a day. That person is earning more. Let's talk about what gaming used to be, and maybe we'll start with, August of last year? Was that the Modesto thing or the Meerkat? I forget which one of those came first. And just give an idea of the scale of what it was to help people understand where it is now. Does one of you guys want to take that?
Yeah, well, so the first, like starting from the beginning, the biggest one would probably be Modesto, based off of my recollection. I was asked when I joined last night, and I thought it was 2022. It was actually 2019. Time flies. And so correct me, you guys, if I'm wrong with any of the recollection. I wish there was a Helium history timeline, because that'd be super cool just to see how we've evolved. I've always thought that would be a cool kind of project. But Modesto would probably be the first one, named after the city that it took place in. And it was probably the first major, they call it closet farms or warehouse farms, or, where you have hotspots that are saying they're in a location that they're not, and they're essentially just beaconing and witnessing between each other. And back in that time, the rewards were much more significant than they are now. So I believe last time I tallied Modesto's account, I think it was like almost 500,000 HNT that was mined by them during that time. Shortly thereafter was Port Huron. So they saw what Modesto did and essentially mimicked them. They were relatively in the same time frame. A couple of things got implemented that kind of stopgated them, right? 𝗞 v10, I think, was the biggest one. Actually, there was 𝗞 v8 that led to 9, that led to 10. That I believe really, made that more difficult for them, and it kind of like stopped them in their. I wouldn't say stopped them in their tracks, but it was very not lucrative for them anymore to do it that way. Yep. And we actually had a pretty quiet moment there after that got established, until they activated data credits. So in the beginning, like first half year, data credits actually wasn't rewarded HNT. That was actually implemented later, and they implemented it, and it led to a couple arbitrage moments. So based off of the reward pool, it was like 33%, 32% at a time of all rewards were going to data credit use. But that was scaled based off of how many people were using it, data credit wise. So if you could pump in 90% of all data credit usage during that time, you got 30% of all HNT rewards, hence Meerkat. And so Meerkat started doing that. It was actually, they keep a lot of things behind closed doors, but rumor, so conspiracy theories, it was actually software based, how they were implementing that much data going through one hotspot. Because hardware specs wise, you can't do that. 8 channels, 400 millisecond time delay. You can't push the data that they were pushing. So I, at the time, this was like HIP 10 time frame, I suggested potentially maybe having a hardware cap limit where, we expect nothing more than this because the hardware can't do it. So why should we be able to reward people for that?
Yep.
And I think they found just a different means. It was like an Oracle situation that actually, and then just the way that data credits will like overflow. So like 1-to-1 was actually the preferred method for serving Meerkat. But I do have a timeline that I did on the ETL Dewey because, this is where a lot of the HIP-40 actually comes into play too, right? Because even though it seems like everything moves fast and, the last 2 years have just like flown by, nothing is fast on Helium when it comes to development and implementing anything. And I believe it was like 2 months from the time that Meerkat started doing that exploit to having on-chain code to curve that exploit. They were able to get almost 200,000 HMT during that time. So that's where HIP-40 comes in. It's the realization that, yes, there could be bugs, exploits, vulnerabilities. Fixing them definitely takes time. And so we kind of want to be able to, in the most severe cases, protect Helium, in those times of need kind of deal. And, obviously not being a co-author, Neil knows a lot more of the most recent developments for HIP-40, so I'll hand it to him. But I'd honestly expect it to be implemented and never used. Like that would be the ideal. Like let's have it there for when it, the case happens. But hopefully in the future, we never have to use it. Maybe even more so than a rescue block. Rescue blocks are kind of the same concept.
Right.
They're there in worst case scenarios, and they don't use it unless they have to.
Yeah, it's kind of like a reserve parachute. You spend a bunch of money on it, and then you're like, I hope I never use this thing. I hope this is a waste of money. Right?
Yeah.
Dig it.
That's the thing. Those old hacks were unbelievably large compared to what we're seeing today. Most high earning hotspots that are hacking are earning one a day. So, 500,000 or the odd 0.2 here is, insignificant in number, but there is still gaming, obviously. Yeah. And that's kind of why HIP-40 comes into place.
Yeah. Let's start with talking about that then. So what's HIP-40? What's it supposed to do? Maybe what are some of the hazards and when do we think it'll start hammering people?
Yeah, so that the major hazard with it is that if one central entity controlled the list, then it's centralized control over the whole decentralized network. So the idea is with it that, if, for example, one of the analytics firms came along and created a model and they said, we think this is gaming, they could prepare a list. And then the decentralized nature of it is that validators would choose to use this list. And if every consensus member had a block for a particular hotspot in place, then any POC transactions for that hotspot would be denied. So
okay, let's hang on a second, Neil. Let's back up. So
if so much, yeah.
Yeah, if people are brand new to, especially to Helium, and they're just like gaming, let's define a couple of these things. So the way that Helium works in general is you've got a hotspot. That hotspot is beaconing out these radio signals. Other hotspots around are witnessing those radio signals, and everybody gets rewarded based on their beacons and witnesses. But they get rewarded, that kind of gets filtered through this group of bigger computers called validators. And so the idea with HIP-40, as I'm understanding it, is the validators would have control over whether or not, and however they decide this is kind of the HIP-40 thing and this algorithm you're talking about, is they could say, hey, we think Nick's hotspot is cheating. We're just going to remove its ability to earn HNT. Is that kind of right? Or is there some big pieces I'm missing?
Yeah, no, exactly right. And that's generally what they do in the email world now, is that you'll subscribe to a list and that list will filter your email based on being blocked by that company. So But yeah, the idea is that there could be many lists, So if we have machine learning that selects a load of hotspots, that machine learning can create a list. And if we agree that that list is right, then the validators can choose to decentrally use this list. So we're not being controlled by one source or one power.
Yep. Dig
And
it.
that's the
Rob,
idea
I'm
with
coming to
it.
you in a second because I got a bunch of sus-spot stuff. But I wanted to notice in the chat, Jose has asked, like, once the HNT is gone, it's into someone's wallet, there's no way to get it back. Like, no. Once someone cheats and they win, you can't uncheat them. The only thing you can probably do is stop them from cheating more. So it's the nature of the blockchain in this ecosystem. Like, that's how it works. If they win, they more or less, they get away clean. All right, Rob, let's talk about sus-spots, because this was kind of a project of yours, right, that you started to say, like, hey, these guys, I think these guys are cheating. Is that right?
Yeah, so I've been, I'm pretty active in the POC discussion channel on Discord, and one fairly common question that people jump in there with is, I've spotted a gateway that looks like they're spoofing. Can I report it? How can we stop this? And there's no official way to report hotspots. There's no, official process for that. So I figured, all right, I'll throw a little app together and at least have a place to point people to report these things, with a huge disclaimer that this is pure informational only. Like, we're not doing anything with this list. It's just data gathering to try to, get the community involved and be able to build this list out. So that's where it started. I've planned to take it further, but, day job and other things
real
make
life gets in the way
that
sometimes.
difficult, right? Yeah.
Right. And also, just so folks know, you were the one running, what was the one I used all the time that you and I talked about? Like, you talked me through.
Helium.Place was the first
good.
app I wrote. And that app actually taught me more about Helium and how it's the inner workings of it work than anything else. And loved that project. It just got Mapbox cost got ridiculously expensive, which was good and bad. It meant people were using my app, but bad because it was a free app and it was just costing me too much money.
Yeah.
So Hotspotty had everything that I was offering, so I figured I'd just point people to that.
Yeah, no, I used Helium.Place a lot. That was one of my my staples for consulting for a long time. Was walking people through. So thanks for putting that up. Okay, but now it's sus-spots.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, I'm seeing something in the chat. I don't know what your name is. A. May as well spoof only 100% win-win in spoofer's case. I'm just going to be I'm just going to be non-PC and just say fuck you if you're cheating. Right? That's from me to you. If you're cheating, go fuck yourself. And if I find you, we can have a nice conversation that one of us won't enjoy. And I think that's it's hard because you can't really do anything. You're right. It's 100% win for a spoofer if they win. And you've got people on YouTube right now basically teaching other people how to cheat and no one's calling them on it. And so part of this conversation for me was to say, hey, there's cheaters out there. Some of them are hiding. Some of them are in public. If they're in public and they're teaching you how to cheat, then you should call them on it. I would unsubscribe from their channel. Don't support cheaters. We are trying to build a network that is awesome, that is super useful, that is useful for everyone. And if you're cheating on there, then that makes it harder for all of us to win together. One of the kind of fundamental pieces of this blockchain stuff is the WAGMI, W-A-G-M-I, we're all going to make it, is we are only all going to make it if we all contribute and we all do a good job. Now, there's always going to be 1 or 2% assholes who fuck everything up, and I guess that makes this video non-PC or non-whatever child-friendly. But yeah, that's my first kind of general PSA. Okay, so now that we're done with that kind of intro piece, we got HIP40, which is the validator deny list. The big danger there, Neil, is as you said in the beginning, someone gets control of that and accidentally knocks out a hotspot or purposefully knocks out a hotspot that isn't cheating, that looks like it's cheating. Is that right?
Yeah, but the way it works is that everyone would have to agree to the same list. So, if there's a public way to see what list you're on and query it, I don't see there's many problems with it. But, if you end up on 10 lists, then you've got to be doing something wrong if 10 lists decide that you're gaming. So, I don't think it's going to be that wrong. I think the people that will be creating these lists will be curating them and really doing the research,
Yep. Dig it. Okay. So is there any reason, either Anthony or Rob, to not support HIP-40? Is there anything in there that you guys are like, well, there's this one little thing we got to fix. Let's kind of hold back on that. What are you guys thinking?
Yeah, I mean, truly for me, the only thing is, and I've kind of come around to the idea simply because the challenge that we are facing, and that challenge being, how do you prove something is physically where it is in a blockchain decentralized digital way? That is just an incredibly difficult challenge that I don't think we have a realistic way to solve. And so HIP-40 is it. But for me, the biggest thing is truly just it's no longer a true decentralized blockchain, machine. There's this centralized component to it that is humans on the other side. But that's just a pure, I don't know, a mindset that I have with blockchain projects.
Sure.
But again, this challenge is just so great. I kind of get over that a little bit right now. So
yeah. Anthony, anything to add to that on HIP-40?
I think it's like with anything, right? There's compromises, all right? And so I think HIP-40 as it is a good stepping stone. And there are things that I think can be improved upon. For example, Neil, correct me if I'm wrong. I've been kind of out of the loop of HIP-40 recently, but I know that the push was kind of to have a committee to stand up the first list, or potentially have lists, like someone's going to make these lists, essentially. There's people that are going to be making these lists. And that kind of goes against, the decentralized manner of things. It's not autonomous. It's not code on the chain kind of deal. But, I think it's a step in the right direction that could lead to, maybe they have decentralized, maybe a secondary consensus group, once someone comes up with the code to mimic what those committees or those groups are doing, and then at the end of the day, it's all opt-in also, right? So validators can decide to list a list or not. And you need all 43 members to agree on the same thing to get it denied. So if not all 43 agree, so if not all 43 has the same list or the same hotspot or account on a list that they have, there's going to be holes. It's going to be very sporadic. I don't want to say it would be lucky, but I think, if we see a concrete wall to some gaming, they have to be seriously bad gamers. Everyone upon community would all need to agree that, okay, Meerkat, that was bad. Everyone agreed, like the one person was doing it, right? But even then, if that person stood up validators, there could be some gaps, right? So that's like one of the limiting or concerns that I have with HIP-40, but I still think, as a community, we're great. Like as a community, we all will, we all band together when we see something that's not right, and that's like something that I fell in love with, with Helium from the get-go.
Hey, Jeremy's on there. So Jeremy Cooper's on the chat. Anthony is saying, technical note, denial just requires a majority of the 43 CG consensus group. So the consensus group is the group of validators that get selected to validate all the transactions. So it looks like it's a majority, not all of them. I'm guessing that's right.
Yeah, it's changing as we learn a bit more about it. I mean, the way validators work at the moment, there's going to be a new transaction that says, they get a penalty right now if they blocked a hotspot. So the way consensus handles it needs to change, and we're learning about how much needs to happen. But originally we thought it was everyone has to agree, but it's a majority.
Cool. Okay. Dig it. Let's I guess the other thing to put in perspective that I forgot early on is one of Jose's questions, which is how much of the network is being cheated right now? Of all the HNT being released to the POC stuff, how much of it is going to cheaters? The rough number I've heard is 5% or less. I don't know if you guys are seeing anything different. That's just a memory number. That's not, I don't have any place I can point to that data. You guys see anything different?
Yeah, I don't know that there is any. Helium has stated that they have some numbers that they work with. But from just discussions and what I've seen, I personally feel like the number is like 5%-ish or less. It just doesn't feel that big. It's just people scream about it. So of course makes the problem seem bigger than it probably is. Yeah. So just my gut and personal is probably 5%.
Yeah. Definitely not 40% AAA. Okay, so that's it. 40 is the good.
Definitely perspective also, right? All perspective. It seems like AAA expects 40% spoofing. I highly doubt that to be that high. 5% does feel good, but that's the $1 million question. How do you know? If you don't know them, how do you know?
Right.
If you don't physically have proof, how do you know? So that's where that's the $1 million question for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think this is one of these really interesting questions where you think that there should be a clear answer, but there's not. And so if anyone in the chat or anyone watching this eventually has a way to get some kind of accurate numbers on that would be super helpful. Because if we're all looking at the same set of numbers and they're accurate, then that makes it much easier to understand where to kind of put this in, as far as priority, right? And I think a little bit of a shift, as far as I can tell, most of Helium Inc.'s efforts are on getting over to light hotspots. They're not really on this gaming stuff. And that's because probably on the back end, they're seeing something different than we're seeing, that gaming is not that big of a deal, right? It's this big public thing that's like, oh my God, people are cheating. But from their perspective, this is my guess, I'm not a Helium Inc. employee, they're probably seeing like, hey, this isn't as big of a deal as making sure the chain is stable. Okay, so let's kind of shift the 5 or 20 or 60 or whatever percentage it is, and let's talk about HIP42, because this has gotten some press recently. Does one of you guys have a bunch of experience with that, or should I take a stab at explaining it?
Well, conveniently, I'm the author of HIP42.
Yes.
So
awesome.
I do know a few things. And we actually just did a question and answers last night that 𝗺Man should be uploading shortly.
Oh, right on.
To
He's
the
so good.
Hotspot podcast.
Yep.
So if you really want to get into some really high level detail on HIP42, we'll make sure to get that link for that question and answers out to everyone. HIP42 kind of is a sibling to HIP40 and HIP44. They all kind of originated around the same time because of the same reason. All trying to attack the same problem, but at different ways, different ways of doing so. And so, going back to September of last year, we had 𝗪ₛ𝗪 and it was apparent that they were doing something that is not normal. It was some sort of exploit, some sort of gaming. The consensus kind of boiled down to that it was like witness repeating to some extent. How they were doing it feels software related more than hardware related in those means. But that's kind of like where it started. HIP42 is based off of seeing that in play. And I did a lot of data analysis during that time. I was crunching a lot of data from the chain, and I started seeing a very common reality that I wasn't aware of, and that is an imbalance when it comes to proof of coverage. A lot of people, and I think it's YouTube influence related, or maybe just people, deploying it themselves. The current system incentivizes witnessing more than anything. So you could do things to your setup. You could engineer it in ways to witness like no other, but beaconing, it doesn't do so well. A prime example, 𝗪ₛ𝗪, they were getting like 2,000 witnesses a day, but they weren't beaconing at all. But they were still getting proof of coverage rewards. And so for me, morally speaking, and knowing proof of coverage from like the inception, you need to do both. And so I kind of wanted for HIP42 and like, a high level like understanding, I wanted to kind of define what an optimal setup is in regards to proof of coverage. On top of, plug in that hole for witness repeating, and it doesn't necessarily fix or prevent completely, it limits, so they have to perform well to earn well. And so if they're performing beacons, which is out of the operator's hands, it's all blockchain controlled. It tells me that they're providing coverage, and that, in my sense, means that they should earn what they're earning. So HIP42 links beacons to witnesses, and it kind of defines that in regards to proof of coverage for a hotspot. Now, I know a lot of people will argue optimal is the most rewards, and I can't deny them that. Like that, a lot of people are looking at that because it keeps the lights on.
Right.
But I also, it doesn't feel good when I see a hotspot earning 2, 3, 4, 5 HNT and not beaconing, because they're getting 5 HNT from everyone else doing their job, and then they're just not returning the favor essentially with their beacons.
100%. Okay, and is there a ratio that you're seeing where it's 1-to-1 beacon to witness, or 1-to-20, or is there? Yeah, what are you kind of seeing for that?
So for the optimal, the definition that I chose, I'm kind of leaning towards 70% bidirectional. So if you wanted to be 100%, you have a hotspot that's able to beacon to a witness, and then that witness, when it beacons, should be able to go back to that original hotspot. That's 100%, bidirectional communication. But LoRa is not 100% bidirectional by nature. We have P2P stability issues on the network that are currently getting worked on. I know it takes a while. People are frustrated. It's a very hot topic.
Sure. And
I was aware of that. So when I came up with the numbers and I looked at, the blockchain, I noticed that 95% of all hotspots, if not more, mind you, we grow every day, meet the 70% bidirectional list by nature. And so the outliers, the ones that don't, are they set up because they chose to set up themselves that way? Are they set up because laziness, maybe not understanding, the requirements of setting up a miner? It could be ISP related. Does that mean they need to do a little bit more work and get a new ISP, set up for that miner? And then it also then boils down to gamers. Is it someone that is witness repeating? And obviously, it's easier to witness repeat without beaconing. Try to factor in.
Anthony, make sure I'm understanding this right. It's not a function of how many beacons you send out. It's a function of how often that beacon is heard by a hotspot, and then you can hear that hotspot's beacon. Is that right? Or do you have to beacon a certain amount of times a day in order to qualify?
So based on the algorithm, it's all about your unique witnesses from your beacons. So the witness list that we have on Explorer, it's on like the bottom right of your hotspots.
Yep.
That is a 5-day bucket that shows unique addresses that can hear your beacons.
Yep.
So I take that number and I go, okay, well, if you can communicate to all these hotspots, okay, you should be able to, based off of the design of the blockchain, hear roughly 4 times more in return, because each one of those should be able to beacon 4 times a day, resulting in you hearing them back.
Right. Okay.
Right? But that would be 100%. That would be like a 1-to-1, and I was like, that doesn't work, right? Because if you take a look, we're at about 70%. So out of the 4, theoretical max beacons, the average is 2.4 right now. So then I added a compensation factor in there to be like, okay, I understand you're not going to get 100% bidirectional witnessing on your hotspot. So let's add a buffer there based off of network stability, network performance, and that kind of deal. And then on top of that, add more wiggle room. So the 5-day window, right? Because what if you had a day that you don't beacon? It happens, Sadly, it happens. Hopefully, light hotspots, cross your fingers. We can get away from that, but it happens, right? And so the 5-day window adds a buffer, flattens everything out, kind of makes it, and then the limit is on a day, the daily limit. So it's not a per block or epoch limit, and in HIP42, it goes into a lot more detail on that too, like why those buffers, those buckets are used. And it, at the end of the day, the math plays out to be about, expecting 70%, meaning for every 1 unique witness on a beacon, you're able to claim 8 in return, is the dirty napkin math.
Okay. Rad, one thing I want to point out for folks watching this is, I mean, to me, this is like the shining demonstration of how awesome Helium can be, right? As far as I know, Anthony, you're not a employee of Helium. Just a dude with an expertise applying it to a problem for the good of the community. I mean, fuck, it doesn't really get better than that. That's awesome. So thank you for putting a ton of work in. Yeah, if there's anything we can promote to help you do a continuing excellent job, then right on. I'm going to switch over to Rob. I know you're kind of sitting there watching this thing. Rob, what are you thinking about this? What are some points that you're rolling around in your brain bucket? I know you've spent a lot of time trying to understand some of this stuff.
Yeah. Are you specifically talking about HIP-42 still, or just gaming in general? Or
yeah. I think 42 for now. We can move on to gaming in general if you got something big there.
Yeah. No, that sounds good. Yeah, I like the idea of HIP-42, mainly because if you think about LoRaWAN networks, 90+% of the traffic on a LoRaWAN is an uplink, which is what witnessing is. But there's still that percentage of downlinks that are required for it to work well. So if you have a hotspot that never beacons, then you're never downlinking, which means you aren't providing the full LoRaWAN value. So I think something like HIP-42 is great for that. Getting the ratios right is tricky, and Anthony did a ton of analysis on that, and I feel pretty good with where he landed with it. I mean, it's not going to impact very many legitimate setups. Like it's a pretty gracious buffer that he landed with. So I'm comfortable with it. And I feel good about that. I did ask the question, I think it was yesterday in Discord, about changing the incentive buckets to make beaconing more valuable. Because right now at 5%, it's just not, it's not nearly as valuable as witnessing. Because you can witness everyone's beacons, but if you're only beaconing, on average 2.4 times a day, it's just not that much. So it's not worth the effort sometimes to make sure you're properly set up to beacon, especially if you're in dense areas where you can just witness all day long and it doesn't matter if you beacon. So that's another reason I think those two in combination, we need to get more incentive to get people to set up properly, because right now it's heavily weighted on the witnessing. So HIP-42, it feels like a good step.
Cool. Two questions, Anthony. I saw when the chat, are off-grids going to be disproportionately affected by HIP-42, or it won't matter, right? Is my giant badass fucking setup on a mountain, is that going to get crushed by HIP-42, or will that not make a difference?
It all boils down to beaconing.
Okay.
Right? It doesn't matter if you're rural, if you're in the city. If you're beaconing like the blockchain intends you to beacon, you'll be fine. Now, the question comes into play, is your setup beaconing? If it's not beaconing today, then it's going to be affected. If it's not beaconing because of something out of your control, there are edge cases and things that are going to be built into this HIP to make sure that you don't get the short end of the stick, right? And yep. I highly recommend anybody that hasn't fully read the HIP to look into it, and you'll see, I'm not out there to clip people. I'm not out there to Robin Hood from the rich to the poor. I'm trying to kind of finally have an optimal definition for a setup that is incentivized by the blockchain. Awesome. And the numbers that I give are just what I stumbled upon my data analysis. Anybody, data is public. If you can find better numbers, like if you think that the compensation factor should be 2.5, then that's perfect. Then
propose it, right? Do the work.
Yeah, yeah. And there's that built into it, because I don't expect an ideal situation. Now, if you design an off-grid setup and you purposely make it so that it witnesses, and that's the purpose of that setup, then it will be affected. And I would recommend just thinking about what it would take to make it beacon like it's supposed to at that point. Yep. Is it that?
And is there anything particular you're thinking of? Like, I'm not a super geeky dude. I'm just putting these things up and making sure they're connected. Is there something I might be doing accidentally that's stopping it from beaconing?
Big one's local network, really. Like, okay. I know 4G, like everyone points to relay because it's like the person to yell at if there's a problem.
Right.
We've had relay from the beginning. The problem actually is gossiping right now for relays. and not the actual use of relays. Because if everyone knew your relay status, you would work just perfectly fine. It's just the fact that gossip takes a long time now. And one of the big things is, does it make sense to wait until light hotspots? And
Right.
I would say it'd make my life easier, to be honest. I wouldn't have to do compensation factor. I wouldn't have to do S beacons. I wouldn't have to do any of that, right? But the question is, when light hotspots at that point? And do we want to build this now, and then we can just disable those features when light hotspots come out? Make it so chain variable activation on light hotspots, and then we still have the function. We just don't need the compensation factor anymore, and we don't need to assume the network is going to give you a bad dice roll,
Dig it. I'm seeing Evil Yoshi Gaming having ideas on 8-to-1 or 20-to-1. Like, look, dog, do the work, present the data. If you've got data that supports your position, then we're working to make the network better, not to make one of us have some hip. So yeah, whatever you're kind of pushing out there is rock on with the math. And if you're not sure about what the math is, then that's something to figure out on your own. Neil, anything to add to all that stuff before we go to HIP 44?
The first thing I want to say is just heliumvote.com. So 42 is being discussed at the moment. If you like the idea and it's just a temperature check, it's not saying it's going in tomorrow, please go vote, get your thought across. As with any of these HIP processes, you can just come talk to us, talk through the issue if you have concerns. But I think it's important to highlight that 90% of normal hotspots operating won't be affected by this. I think I remember seeing some of the scales. It was like, as long as you beacon once or twice a day, you're generally fine for the whole day.
Yep.
So even if you skip 3 out of your 4 in a day, you'd still be fine. So most hotspots won't get hit by this.
Cool. Super cool. And then the best way to, when you say come talk to you, is that on Discord? Is that to add talking in GitHub? Like where's the best way to connect?
HIP 42 channel is pretty good. I've been living in there recently because of the helium vote that Neil mentioned. Shameless plug. It's a temperature check. It's essentially, I was told by the core devs that they don't have the engineering capability. So essentially, this vote is to see if I'm going to get put to work for the next 2 to 3 months to develop this myself. Right. So if you vote yes, you're putting me to work. If you vote no, good for me. I guess I don't have to go to work for the next 3 months.
You get my yes
out,
vote.
So.
I want people like you working for sure. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so let's do HIP 44 then, which is, what is it, the witness decay? Yeah, one of you guys want to talk through what that means? Neil, you want to take that one, or?
I think it's going to be better for Anthony again to talk it out, but I suppose just to make it easier for your viewers, we should probably talk about what these HIPs are targeting, right? What type of gaming is happening?
Okay,
on the network.
Totally. Walk me through it.
Yeah. So the biggest attack on the network now is that you have a miner in one location, and then you have what's called a packet forwarder in another location. I'm not explaining how to game, but basically they're just replaying the packets. So they're witnessing a hell of a lot more than they're beaconing. And sometimes when we were doing HIP 40, for example, we pulled up a flaw that said anyone earning over what average hotspot earned in 2 weeks was pulled up on the list. And when we looked back through the logs, we could see this pattern emerging that they were never beaconing. They were relayed to block it, and they were blocking any inbound connection. So these HIPs are a much better way of looking at how to deal with this kind of problem. But HIP 40 is like that kind of HIPs is going to take a while. Let's block them until we can fix them kind of thing. But yeah, 44 is about decay, right? Anthony's probably better to describe it.
Hang on one second, Neil. I wanted to expand on a point you made that may be clear to the 4 of us, but may not be clear to the average hotspot owner, is that a hotspot is made up of, and we'll just do the non-technical version, 2 different things. One is like the radio and one is the computer. The radio is the packet forwarder, the computer is the miner. This is not technical at all. Just because you split those 2 things, and there's at least one really good reason to split those 2 things if you're running a remote hotspot, which is what I'm running. It's one of my DIYs, is the packet forwarder is out on the mountain. It's the radio. It doesn't take up a lot of data. So on that one, I can use a very low data basically plan, right? I'm using like less than 100 megabytes a month. Whereas if I put the entire hotspot out there, the computer and the radio, the miner and the packet forwarder, it would use something like I don't know, 50 to 120 gigs a month. So orders of magnitude of difference. So there's a reasonable reason to split those two things. But the way that the system is set up, I don't think that anyone planned for people to try and cheat this as hard as they could. If you split those two things, there are ways to make sure that the miner sees things that the packet forwarder isn't actually doing. And that's probably as deep as we need to go into that. But that's kind of the fundamental problem, right? And just for the record, my DIYs got hit by whatever this latest thing is. So my DIYs are down. If you look at Amateur Jade Hair, it's not working because whatever the net was that Helium has kind of cast out to help block this in the short term has caught mine up. So, technically, or not technically, but
I don't think they're getting caught by anything. There's a gossip issue on the net.
Oh, there's a gossip issue. Okay, cool.
So, researching this issue today, I spent all day with the DIY guys. I've been looking at DIY hotspots. Yep. They're submitting witness beacons like normal, but for some reason the challenger is dropping them. And then in other occasions, they're trying the max 20 retries of, when a POC happens, a witness has 10 tries to try and get it over. And then they have a 20 block window to supply that in. So something in that challenger side is dropping them. So it can range from DIYs to normal hotspots to gamed hotspots. I think this is more of the issue people are facing than something suspect in the background.
Got it. Let's see. Before we do HIP44, Anthony, Rob in the chat, there's this thing, is the data on susspots useful? I'll let you answer
that. Yes and no, right? So when one of the most important things when people report hotspots or they suspect somebody's gaming, they need to understand that they have to provide some behaviors, right? You can't just look at a hotspot on Explorer and go, this one's definitely gaming just because of the way it looks, right? There's got to be behaviors there. So when I built susspots, I made sure to add a list of the behaviors that I know are common with some of the gaming clusters and allow people to simply select. So pick these behaviors. But then there's this other option at the bottom of that list. So if the behaviors aren't there and it's a new behavior, you just choose other and fill that in. I think over time that piece will be more valuable than the standard reporting, because once we see a behavior, there's no need to report 1,000 other hotspots doing that exact same thing. Like, that's not very helpful. But if there's a new behavior that we haven't seen before, that's where it's extremely useful. I will say right now the data is not not great, but I haven't been able to add a lot of the context and other stuff that I want to in susspots to make it a little bit better. So hopefully over time I can find some free time on this side project and build it out a little bit more. And then my ultimate goal really is to be able to take that list and then have some process with Helium where that gets consumed by them in a useful way, right? And not just report to report's sake, but actually be able to leverage it down the road. So
dig it.
Yes and no is the answer.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's another demonstration of a person just kind of sitting in their house or building or whatever, plugged with their face plugged into the computer, contributing to the network for nothing. Like you're not, as far as I know, you're not making any money off susspots. I mean, maybe you make some ad revenue. Nope. I don't know, but yeah, like I think
nothing, zero.
It's such a cool thing to see all of these really talented people apply their expertise that has taken them a lifetime to gather and apply it to helping solve this problem for all of us. I mean, a public thank you to all of you guys, or to you three guys on this for putting that effort in there with no kind of real expectation of any financial reward. That's special. Thank you guys. Okay. Anthony, HIP44, walk me through the rest of it.
So HIP44 is actually from the Helium team themselves, the core teams.
Okay.
The code's on chain actually. So everyone has the code for it. It's not activated yet. And so that's where it gets weird, right? Because it was obviously thought of, it was obviously put together, and it came from the same reasoning for HIP40 and HIP42. It definitely wants to target the anti-gaming portion, because
hang
it
on a
doesn't
second. Let's talk about what it is
necessarily-
first. I'm sorry, I didn't ask you that. We just said witness decay and then assumed everyone knew what that was.
So witness decay, right? Essentially, you get witnesses, and at a certain point, the amount that you get rewarded for, like for the consecutive witness, will decrease. So it's it increases up like this, and then it plateaus out. And there's no like cap, there's no like max limit. So essentially, it's just like after 20 witnesses, it's relatively useless to try to get more. Is like the idea behind it. Now they have numbers in HIP44, and they have like suggestions on what they think should the numbers be. If you want to compare the two, HIP42 and HIP44, you can think 42 as like a hard cap, hard limit, because it will be, like you can't get any more than this. Whereas HIP44 would be a soft limit. So like it doesn't stop you from getting 1,000 witnesses in a day, but you're going to get drastically lower rewards compared to before this went in place. So like you can still get rewards for those 1,000 witnesses. It's just not going to reward you nearly as well, before this code change.
And will that have an impact on, let's say, great hotspots? So if you've got a hotspot that's up high, that's optimized, that's all that stuff, will that really kill that hotspot's earnings? Is that kind of the downside of this HIP, or no?
It's hard to say, because like the numbers that they give are just like throwing on the wall kind of deal. Like, hey, we think this is good. They talk about needing to do more data analysis. So like the numbers aren't official. Right. So it really depends on what numbers get landed if it gets approved. But the concern that I have with HIP44 is that, yes, it like combats, the witness repeating that we were talking about. And it will, de-incentivize them. Like, you could throw 1,000, 2,000 witnesses at this hotspot, but you're not going to get, significantly more rewards than if you just did 20, to this one hotspot kind of situation. But, with the network, it puts that soft cap, now everyone falls under that, so even if you do really good, or you have a tower and you're set up, like no matter what, you fall under that soft cap. And then imagine trying to calculate that. So you look at your hotspot and you're like, man, I was doing really good. Now I'm doing terrible. Why am I earning this? And I think that's one of the reasons why I lean towards 42 more, is you can look, you can see like, oh, I'm not beaconing anymore. That is why I'm not earning from witnessing. Whereas this is like, okay, I made this much. Oh, I'm above the soft cap, but shouldn't I be getting more if I got 1,000?
Right.
Like,
so it introduces like a potential for confusion. Okay.
Yeah. How do you calculate every additional past that soft cap, if it makes sense, and if that rewards make sense for you as an owner?
Dig it. All right.
It's
so
an alternative.
That's pretty useful. And I guess that's a demonstration too of how maybe a group will approach this versus kind of singletons. Is we're all kind of coming at this in different ways and figuring out how we do it, and we're all trying different things and seeing, excuse me, what will work. It's pretty cool to see the ecosystem really evolve, and see so much talent and expertise applied to it. Let's back way off. We got about 12 minutes left. I know, Rob, you got to boogie out of here in a little bit. And go back to some really basic stuff. I think that I get asked all the time that it'd be great for me to hear from you guys is, and this is super basic, what is the security risk of adding a Helium hotspot to your home network? Neil, I see you like just going for it. What do you got, dude?
Yeah.
Everyone's kind of looking at each other like we could talk about it, but I would say it's not really a risk, because you're only opening one port inbound, 44158. You're more at risk by letting your friend come over and sharing the Wi-Fi with them than you are your hotspot getting hacked. Untrusted devices are much easier to get into your network than they are than these hotspots are. They're locked down. They only talk out to the updates on one server. They only talk out on port 28.2. So 44158 is just not accessible. It's not like they can, try SSH logins and eventually guess it, or, very locked down.
Okay. Dig it. Rob, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, every device you put on your network has some form of risk, right? It's not risk-free. Opening a port has some risk, but in this case, the rewards greatly outweigh that risk. Like it's very rewarding to do this. But the risk is really, really small. It's one port. That one port is it's listening for P2P traffic. So it's very specific on what it's listening for. There would have to be a massive vulnerability in that P2P process for that to really be a problem. And then at the end of the day, what would happen if somebody got on your hotspot? I mean, there's not realistically not a ton that you can do these days, depending on where you land. But for a home network, I think the risk is extremely small.
Dig it. Anthony, anything to put on top of that?
It's probably one of the weaker areas that I have, but like what Rob was saying, if they do get into your miner, what will they have access to is the big thing, right? It's the miner, unless you have your home computer somehow hooked up to your miner, you have a bridge internet connection from your home computer to your miner, I would be concerned. But if it's simply its own individual device connected to its own, you could even go really techie with it and do DMZs and stuff if you really, that paranoid or concerned. But it does take a level higher, but I'm not an expert,
Sure.
Obviously look into everything for yourself, look into your home network, because if you start digging, you might be surprised on your status of your home network as is.
Yeah, I look at it like it's like someone looks at their finger and they got a cut on their finger and they're like, I'm bleeding from my finger, but their arm is chopped off and they got an arterial spurt out of their arm because the rest of their network is so poorly protected. So for most of you who are probably like me and don't know much about networking, the addition of a Helium hotspot is nothing. It's not going to add anything really to anything noticeable to your security risk. In fact, the way it was explained to me early on when I was asking this question, I don't know, September of last year from, I think 𝗪1 said, he's like, look, if someone can hack into your hotspot, they're probably going to be working for the NSA and doing something more profitable and useful than hacking into someone's hotspot. Right? Like that's the level of technical expertise it takes, and the reward is super low because you can't steal anyone's HNT by hacking into their hotspot. You would have to give information away to allow that. Okay. I saw one of the things, Rob, someone suggested you should sell the ability to get off the suspects list. I don't see that happening, but that could be a revenue generator for you. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I'll have to think on that one. That's definitely not going to happen. I do want to keep suspects completely free as long as I can without ads. So, just FYI.
Cool. We got, I don't know, 5 minutes left. Any questions in the chat that you guys have that we haven't covered that you feel are super important? Or is there anything that either any of the three of you want to hit before we wrap this up?
Just want to say thank you to everyone that showed up. I think we have like 100 people watching, if I'm seeing this right. Cool. And thanks for all the questions. Like we were saying before, each one of these HIPs has its own channel. Feel free to dive in there. If you guys have any oppositions or any concerns, please, I would love to see the data. I took a lot of time and effort on my end to come up with those numbers, and I can prove it with the data that there is on chain. So if you can prove something better, I'm all for it, because at the end of the day, I'm wanting to make sure Helium is better from it, so.
Dig it. Rob or Neil, anything to put the cherry on top of this sucker?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if anyone has any thoughts on how to combat gaming, I mean, we've heard a lot of things over the last year and a half that have roughly been hanging out in the POC discussion channel on Discord. But drop ideas into POC discussion, and hopefully we'll find some new way to fight these things. But and Anthony, thanks, and Neil, thanks for the HIPs, man. You're doing really good work. I've tried writing a couple myself, and I give up because it's just like, it's just too much work.
Yeah, it's like cool. Neil, did you want to talk about?
People don't quite realize. Yeah. People don't quite realize that we're doing this all for free for the HIPs. We're not getting any financial gain from it, and anything we put in place that needs management is going to be free. There's no paid things for these to be done. So it's really important that we realize that. And I think a lot of the time with these HIPs, people seem to want to have the perfect system, but they forget what we have is bad and we need some way of moving forward. In the same way, HIP 17 isn't perfect in every area. HIP 17, you have coastal areas that just can't increase the density, right. But globally, it solved a problem. So it's about finding that nice balance. And I agree. I assume every HIP writer is the same. You can come talk to them, come and work out your concerns, and if you think there is an issue there, or you think of something better, come talk to us, and we'll go through it.
Yeah, or do the work. The one thing I just noticed, we got 6 minutes to go, is we didn't talk about is this idea of mappers. Do you guys want to see if we can knock that out in a minute or two, or just sketch out some of the giant problems facing the idea of a mapper securing the network? Neil, do you want to kick that one off, or is that outside your wheelhouse?
Sure. Yeah, so the idea of mappers is that we can prove if a hotspot's in the wild somewhere. We can go up to it with a mapper device, and we can say, is it receiving signal? But the issue is the way mappers data is collected, it's an open endpoint on a website that anyone could submit data to. So when you go and say, look, I've mapped it, this hotspot's not there, there's no trust there. There's no trusted data. Now, what's happening with a future hit with hotspots is basically this security key ends up on the LoRa concentrator. So it would only sign things, and you can trust that data, basically. You can trust that RF data because it has to have been physically heard. So the same kind of idea was being thought of for this secure mapper, where the data could be trusted from it, and we could trust that mapper's data to do things about it. And that idea is in a hit, basically. It's not submitted, it's a work in progress. There's some huge problems with it. These devices would have to be just as secure as the person that you trust to run them. And it's a huge thing to get over. These devices would likely need to be potted, so that if you try and remove a chip, you would break the chip off of the board,
And
so
potted just means it's like all dipped in resin, so you can't get like it's physically gets destroyed if you try and fiddle with it. Okay.
And then again, it would be a volunteer thing. Should the people that secure map earn from it in some way? And if there's earnings to it, there's likely to be gaming of it. So we have to make sure it's the right move for the network, and we have the right technology to be able to do it.
Super difficult, thorny problem. Anything to add, Anthony or Rob?
I think the mapper idea is really cool.
Sorry to call you.
Yeah, I do love the general idea of it. When the idea was first pitched, I had this notion in my head that there would be, basically people getting paid, like their job was going to be to fly around the world with this mapper and map things out, and they would get paid in HNT in return. And but to Neil's point, the moment you add incentive like that, gaming will happen, and so it's a tricky situation. And then if we do get to a point where it is something that's part of the process, scaling it just seems extremely difficult. So tackling those things will be interesting to see how it plays out. I do love the idea though, and I think it's probably going to have to be part of the solution at some point.
Dig it. Yeah.
It's definitely hard to expect also, every hotspot on the network to have access to this as well. So like understanding that not every location at all times will have this, so how do you combat that side of it? Like how do you give them, a waiver or a benefit of the doubt, or, like that kind of deal. And I also thought, because like you were saying earlier, Neil, like anytime you incentivize something, gaming follows, it's just the nature of the beast. And I always thought it would be pretty cool because we keep acquiring partnerships. So for example, I don't know if we have Lime scooters, but if we had like a scooter company that, they're the ones that would benefit from providing that data, then that's a KYC company instead of someone that bought a TTGO off the shelf on eBay and, smacked something together, So even just having it as like an opt-in feature to, them, incentivize them by, waiving maybe a DC, or two when they do prove a hotspot, pass their data for their company, that was something I've thought of before as well. As we start, getting more partnerships and more like KYC companies in the mix, they're the trusted identity. They're the ones that we can be like, hey, you guys realize you did this, right? We see this, it's on chain. It could be a slap on the wrist. It could be, you guys can't use Helium anymore, which would be huge for them, something that, you incentivize them, and on top of, it's part of their service. So that's just my thoughts on it. Mappers, there's definitely a lot more to go along with it. There's a lot that needs to be answered. But, that's the next step, and that's the next iteration. I do believe when it comes to proof of coverage.
Love it. All right, guys, we're going to wrap this up. Thanks a ton to the three of you for coming on and once again, generously donating your time to help the community be more awesome. Tons more conversations to be had around all of these topics. I'm looking forward to seeing all these hips pass and crush and stamp out gamers as to the best of our ability. I'll do the plug for Gristle King. If you guys are watching this for the first time or you're not sure kind of where to find more information, I'm trying to make gristleking.com the kind of sole source for great information on the net. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat that can be answered on that website. So go to gristleking.com and look for your, put your question into the search bar. The rest of you guys, let's see, you can find these three dudes on Discord. It's BFG Neil, Rad Rob, and Anthony RA.eth are the Discord handles, right? That sound right? Anything else you guys want to shout out before we get off? Okay.
All good.
Okay.
Thanks for organising this, and make sure everyone likes and subscribes to Gristle King. He's
all the usual
been
stuff.
killing it.
Right? Yeah, bang and smash and do all the things. All right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Rock on. We're out of here.